the problem now is, as China has been moving up the value chain, these benefits are no longer as, or are not as accessible for European companies, and hence the shock is being felt very strongly at the moment.
Late last week, German car giant Volkswagen announced it was axing up to 100,000 jobs in what it called a, quote, profound strategic shift to counter increased tariffs, stagnating markets for cars, and above all, fierce competition from China. It will cut 1 in 6 of its 660,000 jobs worldwide and production at 4 German factories. It's the largest restructure in the history of the automotive industry. The Chinese threat has been obvious for some time. It's been slow, however, Europe to respond, even though China's out to do to Europe's car industry what it's already done to its solar panel industry, which is to destroy it. Not just cars, China also aims to dominate batteries, wind power machinery, machine tools, pharma and chips. It's what's called an industrial policy of everything. In essence, China's running a mercantilist trade policy, which aims to export surplus capacity to the West while restricting imports into its own market by as much as it can. As a result, it's already running an annual current account surplus of $1 trillion. Yep, $1 trillion. Now, there are trade talks going on today between Brussels, between the European Union and the Chinese. China Shock 2.0, which is often what it's caused, is seen to pose a far bigger threat to European industry than China 1.0, which happened over 20 years ago. Some forecasts predict that 50% of what's left of Europe's manufacturing base could be gone in a decade. Let's talk about this with Max Zenglein, a senior economist at the Conference Board in Singapore. Max, thanks for joining me. First of all, why is China so set on running such a massive trade surplus?
So this is something that goes, or is deeply entrenched in what is called the efforts to strengthen the real economy. So it's part of not only advancing the economy and moving up the value chain, but it also has to do with strengthening the economic security interests of the country. And we've seen how this has been playing out over the past, well, months, if not years. So if anything, they feel reconfirmed that they have been on the right track, and this is countering any arguments that have been also going on for decades that China should shift towards a more consumption-led growth model.
Well, why doesn't China, the Chinese government, why doesn't it increase domestic demand and mop up excess production that way?
Well, there are certain limits to that, what they're producing, and in terms of what then could be bought by domestic consumers. So if you take automotive, for example, this is something where they very quickly scaled up production, and this is proven very successful. You mentioned solar already, so we have a growing number of industries where this is the case, and these are, some of them are consumer products, but a lot of them aren't. So this won't alleviate all the problems, even if they would do that.
The OECD says Chinese industry can get up to 8 times the state subsidies of European industry. Beijing manipulates the currency to make its exports cheaper, Goldman Sachs says 20%. And it keeps a lid on domestic demand. I mean, when you do all that, it isn't free trade, is it?
No, it's not. And I think that's part of the challenge that the world is facing right now. As you mentioned, this is a China 2.0 shock. So the first shock was one that Europe navigated relatively well, if not even benefited. So sticking with the example of solar, at the time when that capacity was built up, this was to the benefit of a lot of German machinery companies, for example. And the problem now is, as China has been moving up the value chain, these benefits are no longer as, or are not as accessible for European companies, and hence the shock is being felt very strongly at the moment.
Do you think Beijing has concluded that the European Union is incapable of a robust response?
So they're getting very different signals. You mentioned the ongoing meeting between the
Yes.
European Trade Commissioner and his Chinese counterpart. Well, in the run-up of the meeting, the German economics minister went to Brussels and also met the Chinese delegation. And the message that's coming out, at least from the readouts that I have been seeing, doesn't really read much of taking a harder position, but one that seeks dialogue, explore opportunities where one can cooperate. So there's a lot of mixed signals. And at the end of the day, I think the reading in Beijing is that they need to engage on a bilateral level. And this could be Germany. We've also seen similar messaging coming from Spain. And that's how they're playing this game. And hence, that makes it difficult to deliver a hard position.
Can you do much at a bilateral level, though, when trade policy in particular, it is one of these areas of public policy which is pretty much the prerogative of the European Commission?
That's correct, but it's the member states that then give them the mandate to carry out these measures. And as we've seen with the measures that have been taken against EVs, so when the tariffs were introduced, these measures then also get voted on. And in that particular case, even though the tariffs were imposed, the voting patterns do reflect that they have ability to influence on a member state level, and hence also have an influence on the weight the EU's measures have.
But as you say, they're often divided, and it's not quite clear what the policy is. With Spain on one side, Germany taking a different view, and of course France wanting to be the most retaliatory of all. I would suggest that the political consequences of this could be quite serious. It was the first China shock that saw in the aftermath the rise of the populist right in Europe and a revolt against globalization. If China shock 2.0 wipes out much of what's left of European manufacturing, and the French certainly think it will, that's going to put rocket boosters under the populist right, is it not?
Absolutely, there's a clear danger for this happening. The uncomfortable, I guess, challenge here is that taking a harder measure against China also comes with economic costs. And this is something that would then also be felt within, and this is something I think that concerns a lot of companies, that it also concerns a lot of politicians. Otherwise, I think you would not have this, this struggle really to taking a difficult choice and trying to recalibrate relations that they have had with China. And I think in all fairness, it's also important to mention that it's not just the China threat that is putting a squeeze on Europe's industrial. It's a lot of things coming together. There's a certain form of complacency. There is the higher energy prices, and so
Indeed.
There's a lot of also internal topics that I think that are also at play here. But of course, the challenges that are coming from China are not making it better. And I think just wishing for the best is probably a very dangerous path to go on.
You're quite right. There are other problems that Europe faces too, which aren't of China's making, did inhibit it, undermine it from competing with Chinese products. But Germany alone lost almost 150,000 manufacturing jobs last year. It could lose even more this year. We know that the European economies are in certain stagnation, but industrial production is much worse. Industrial production, Europe's in decline. I mean, it does seem pretty serious consequences from what's going on.
Absolutely. So so one of the challenges I see at the moment, and also looking at it from a corporate perspective, is that any attempt to respond to let's call it the China challenge, or the China shock point 2, also comes with certain risks, and with more prohibitions and more regulations. This is something I think a lot of corporates are not very positive about. So I think any form of a more resistive position towards China needs to be complemented with a stronger, supportive measures in forms of industrial policy, how this is supposed to be achieved. Now, we've had some of this, the accelerator acts that have been put on the table, but I think this is, there's still much more that can be improved. And I always like to point out to the lessons that Japan has had also in dealing with China. This is a country that has strengthened economic security for over a decade. They have been confronted with rare earths. and China's ability to use it as leverage for some time. We still continue to talk about rare earths as a vulnerability. Quite frankly, at this point, almost 2 decades in, it's if it's a vulnerability, it's almost a stupidity if this hasn't been rectified. But it comes with a cost. It requires investments, and I think that also gives companies a path forward to believe in something credible and changing in Europe.
Max Zenglein in Singapore, thank you for joining us today on Times Radio.